I still remember standing in my grandmother's kitchen the morning after her 79th birthday, sweeping up the crumbs from a cake nobody else had bothered to eat. She was sitting at the table in her blue housecoat, sipping her coffee like nothing happened, but I could see it in her eyes. That quiet, wounded kind of hurt that only comes when the people you love choose a ski trip over you. My parents were somewhere in Aspen, posting photos on Instagram with matching helmets and rental jackets. My grandmother had been alone all night with a store-bought cake and one flickering candle she had probably lit herself. I had shown up the next morning because I couldn't sleep. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I already knew what had been done. And I had no idea that when I walked through her front door that day, two strangers were about to knock and hand me a folder that would change everything. My grandmother, Eleanor, was not the kind of woman people overlooked easily. She had raised 3 children on her own after my grandfather passed when she was 44. She had waitressed, cleaned offices, and eventually saved enough to open a small alterations shop on the corner of Maple and Fifth that became something of a neighborhood institution. She sewed wedding dresses for women whose daughters would later bring their own dresses to her. She owned her home outright. A 2-story colonial with original hardwood floors and a backyard that smelled like lilac in June. She had never once asked my parents for a single dollar. My mother, Diane, had always treated Grandma Eleanor like a burden. Not loudly, not with open cruelty, but in that quiet, erosive way that leaves no marks. Canceled visits, unreturned calls, birthday cards bought in bulk and signed without reading. My father, Robert, followed my mother's lead in everything. He was the kind of man who agreed with whoever was standing closest to him. I, on the other hand, had spent every summer of my childhood in that colonial house. Grandma Eleanor taught me to bake, to sew a button back on properly, and to never let anyone make you feel small. I was 31 years old and still called her every Sunday without fail. I found out about Grandma Eleanor's birthday through a text she sent me 3 days before. Sweetheart, I'm having a little cake on Saturday if you'd like to come. Nothing fancy. Just the family. I texted back immediately. Of course I'd be there. I told her I'd bring flowers and her favorite lemon squares from the bakery on Church Street. Then my mother called me on Friday night. We're going to Aspen, she said, without preamble. Your father surprised me with the trip. We leave tomorrow morning. Be sure to send Mom a card or something. I asked her if she knew about the birthday gathering. She paused just long enough for me to know that she did. She'd be fine, my mother said. She's always fine. She doesn't need a whole production. I drove to Grandma Eleanor's house Saturday afternoon. I brought the lemon squares and a bouquet of sunflowers. When I arrived, she was sitting at the table alone. The cake had a single piece cut out of it. She had put on lipstick, which broke my heart more than anything else, because it meant she had dressed up with hope. You came, she said, like she hadn't expected anyone. I sat across from her and we ate cake and talked for 4 hours. I told her she deserved better. She just patted my hand and said, I already know that, honey. The question is whether they'll ever figure it out. I didn't understand what she meant then. I would soon. The next day I came back. I told her I wanted to help her clean up and maybe organize the garage, which had been bothering her for months. She was grateful. We put on old music and started sorting through decades of accumulated life. Around 11 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I answered it, since Grandma Eleanor was up on the step stool in the garage. 2 people stood at the door. A man in a gray suit and a woman in a navy blazer, each holding a leather folder. Professional, calm. The kind of calm that means they do this every day. Is Eleanor present? The man asked. I called for her. She came through the house wiping her hands on a dish towel, took one look at them, and smiled like she had been expecting them. Right on time, she said that she invited them inside. I went to leave the room, but she touched my arm. Stay, she said. I want you here for this. The woman in the navy blazer opened her folder and set several documents on the kitchen table. Grandma Eleanor sat down, folded her hands, and looked at me. I need you to know something, she said. And I need you to hear it from me before anyone else tells you their version. The man in the gray suit was an attorney named Mr. Callahan. The woman was a notary. They had come to finalize the last stage of a legal process that Grandma Eleanor had quietly set in motion 9 months earlier. She began to explain, 8 months before her birthday. My parents had approached her with a proposition. They had found a developer who wanted her property. The colonial house, the backyard, the small detached garage, all of it. The developer was building a row of townhomes and needed her corner lot to complete the project. My parents told her the offer was fair. They told her she was getting older and that maintaining the house was becoming too much for one person. They brought her paperwork and explained it in the gentlest possible language, which was how I knew they had practiced. My mother had a gift for making manipulation feel like concern. They told Grandma Eleanor the sale would net her enough to move into a lovely assisted living facility across town. They had already toured it. They showed her brochures. What they didn't tell her was that the developer had agreed to pay my parents a 10% referral commission if the deal closed. What they didn't tell her was that the assisted living facility had a waiting period of 18 months and a monthly fee that would drain her savings within 4 years. What they didn't tell her was that they had already told the developer the sale was essentially done. They had made plans for her life without asking her what she wanted from it. Grandma Eleanor listened to my parents' proposal with her hands folded and her face composed. She told them she needed a few weeks to think about it. They said, of course, take your time, and left feeling confident. The very next morning, she called her own attorney, a woman she had known for over 20 years named Patricia Holt, who had handled the paperwork when she first bought the house and had drafted my grandfather's will. Grandma Eleanor did not use the attorney my parents had casually recommended. She used the woman she trusted. She told Patricia everything. Over the following weeks, the two of them worked quietly. First, Grandma Eleanor had the property independently appraised. The number came back 43% higher than what my parents had quoted her. The developer had offered her below market value, and my parents had presented that number as fair. Then she did something that nobody in our family expected. She transferred the deed, not to my parents, not to the developer, not to herself alone. She established a living trust and transferred the property into it, naming herself as trustee and me as successor trustee. She also added a conservation easement to the back portion of the lot, which legally prevented any developer from building on that section of the property for the next 30 years. By the time my parents came back to check on the status of the sale, the house was legally untouchable in the way they had imagined. And Grandma Eleanor had documentation proving exactly what their original proposal had omitted. Mr. Callahan slid the folder across the table to me. Inside was a complete copy of the trust documents, the amended deed, the property appraisal, the legal correspondence my parents had sent to the developer, and a letter in my grandmother's handwriting addressed to me personally. I read the letter right there at the kitchen table while the attorney and the notary sat quietly. She wrote that she had never doubted me. She wrote that she had known for a long time that my parents saw her primarily as an asset to be managed rather than a mother to be loved. She wrote that she did not want vengeance. She wanted security. And she wanted the person who had shown up with sunflowers and lemon squares to be the one who protected what she had spent her life building. She asked me to serve as her successor trustee, not out of obligation, but because she believed I would honor the responsibility. I looked up from the letter and she was watching me with those steady gray eyes. I didn't want to ask you ahead of time, she said. I didn't want you to worry or feel caught in the middle. But I need someone in my corner now. I always did. I told her yes before I even finished drying my eyes. My parents returned from Aspen on a Tuesday. I know this because my mother posted a photo at the airport with a caption about needing another vacation to recover from their vacation. Grandma Eleanor's birthday was not mentioned anywhere on her social media. Not a single word. 2 days later, my father called the developer to check on the timeline. The developer told him he had received notice from a trust attorney. that the property was no longer available, and that any further contact should be directed to legal counsel. My father called me in a panic. "Do you know anything about this?" he demanded. "Something's wrong with your grandmother's property. Some attorney is blocking the sale." I told him I didn't know about it. I told him he should probably speak directly to Grandma Eleanor. He and my mother drove to her house that same evening. I know because she called me afterward and described the conversation with the kind of dry, precise clarity that reminded me she had been dealing with difficult people her entire life. My mother told her she had been manipulated by some attorney who didn't have her best interests at heart. My father said the developer's offer was extremely generous. My grandmother offered them both a seat at the kitchen table and then placed the independent appraisal in front of them without a word. There was a long silence. My father said the market had changed recently. My mother said that a trust was unnecessarily complicated for a woman her age. My grandmother poured herself a cup of tea and waited for them to finish. Then she told them, very calmly, that she had also retained Patricia Holt to review the referral commission arrangement my parents had negotiated with the developer without her knowledge. She told them that Patricia believed there were grounds to explore whether that arrangement constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Given the advice my parents had provided her in the context of a family relationship, she was not threatening a lawsuit. She was simply making clear that she understood exactly what had happened. My parents left shortly after. The fallout did not come as a single dramatic confrontation. It came in small, steady waves over the following weeks. The developer withdrew his interest after the conservation easement was recorded, since the buildable area no longer suited his project. The referral commission my parents had been expecting never materialized. My father had already told several colleagues about the deal, framing it as a shrewd business move that would benefit the whole family. Explaining why it had collapsed was its own particular embarrassment. My mother attempted to repair things with Grandma Eleanor through a series of sudden, attentive gestures, phone calls, an offer to come help reorganize the garage, a flower arrangement delivered without any note. Grandma Eleanor received all of it with perfect, unhurried politeness and made no changes to the trust documents. Within our extended family, word traveled the way it always does, sideways and partially, through cousins and aunts and a well-meaning uncle who mentioned it at Thanksgiving. My parents found themselves in the uncomfortable position of explaining why Grandma Eleanor had felt the need to hire a lawyer to protect herself. From their advice, there was no good answer to that question. In the months that followed, I spent more time at the colonial house than I ever had as an adult. We finished organizing the garage. We repainted the front porch railing. I helped her interview a part-time housekeeper she had decided she wanted, on her own terms. She told me once, during one of our Sunday afternoon conversations on that porch, that the hardest thing about getting older was not the physical limitations. It was the way people began to look at you like a problem, needing solving rather than a person who still had preferences and plans and opinions about their own life. She told me she had spent 9 months quietly solving her own problem before anyone realized she was doing it. I asked her when she had first suspected what my parents were planning. She said the moment my mother handed her the brochure and said, "We already toured the facility for you." She understood exactly what was happening, because no one tour a facility for someone else as a gift. They do it because they have already decided. She had smiled, accepted the brochure, and started making her own calls the next morning. Grandma Eleanor's 79th birthday came and went with one candle on a store-bought cake. But her 80th birthday was a different story. I organized it myself. I reserved the back room at a restaurant she loved. I invited family members she actually liked, neighbors from the block, and 3 women from her old alterations shop who she had stayed in touch with for decades. Patricia Holt came. So did Mr. Callahan, who turned out to have a wonderful sense of humor over dinner. Grandma Eleanor wore her favorite green dress and a pair of earrings she had owned for 40 years. She sat at the head of the table and laughed at stories I had never heard before, about customers and mishaps and a wedding dress that had to be let out 3 times in 4 months. My parents were invited. They came, they sat at the far end of the table and were polite and somewhat subdued the entire evening. My mother gave her a gift card. My grandmother thanked her with genuine warmth because Grandma Eleanor was not a woman who needed the last word to know she had one. The house still stands on the corner of Maple and 5th. The lilac in the backyard blooms every June. The hardwood floors are original. The deed belongs to the trust, and every document in that trust has my name on it alongside hers, placed there by a 78-year-old woman who saw everything coming and quietly made sure the right person was standing beside her when it arrived. I think about what my grandmother did, and I am still astonished by the clarity of it. She made no accusations. She did not cry or beg or demand explanations from people who would never have given her honest ones. She simply called the person she trusted, asked the right questions, and built a legal structure around herself that protected everything she had earned. She did it quietly, in the months when she was supposed to be grateful and cooperative, while sending birthday cards and answering phone calls like a woman who had no idea what was being planned. And when my parents came to collect, there was nothing left to collect. What stays with me most is the letter she wrote, not the legal documents, not the appraisal. The letter in her handwriting, on pale blue stationery, that said, "I always knew you would show up. I just needed to make sure there was something left standing when you did." I kept that letter. It's in a frame on my desk. I have learned more about dignity and real courage from watching Eleanor handle that year than from any other experience in my life. The strongest thing a person can do is refuse to be managed, even when everyone around them has already decided that they will be. She is 80 years old now. She still does alterations for a few longtime customers from the front room. She still makes her coffee at 6 in the morning. She still calls me first when something good happens. And every time I drive past that corner of Maple and 5th and see the lilac in the backyard, I think about a woman who sat alone with a birthday cake and a flickering candle and decided, without bitterness and without drama, that she was not finished yet. She was just getting started. I won't pretend the anger was never there. It was. The night I sat at that kitchen table reading those trust documents, something burned through me I couldn't name. It wasn't just frustration. It was the grief of discovering that the people who should have protected the woman who raised them had instead calculated how to profit from her. That feeling surfaced at odd moments, folding laundry, sitting in traffic. I would think about that brochure and my mother saying, "We already toured the facility for you." And the burn would return. But here is what I eventually understood. Grandma Eleanor had not built her life around making others feel what they owed her. She had built it around deciding what she deserved and arranging her world accordingly. Those 9 months with Patricia Holt were not months of bitterness. They were months of clarity. She knew the right response to someone managing your life without consent was not rage, it was competence. I tried to follow her example. I stopped spending energy on my parents and started making sure Grandma Eleanor's later years were filled with the presents she deserved. I drove her to appointments. I helped choose a new recliner. I learned, with some burn patches, how to make her lemon pound cake the way she made it on Sundays when I was 7. My parents eventually came around. My father started calling on Saturdays. My mother brought food and sat at the table and actually talked. I don't know what changed inside them. Grandma Eleanor welcomed them warmly and never once mentioned the easement, or the appraisal, or the folder. The house said everything that needed saying. There is a particular power in outlasting people who underestimated you. Not sharp revenge. Something quieter, like a house with good bones while everything else changes. Solid, rooted, still standing. I'm grateful I showed up with sunflowers. I am grateful she told me to stay. The real inheritance was never the property. It was being chosen by someone whose judgment you trust completely. In a moment that counted, I carry that every day. The colonial house on Maple and 5th will still be standing long after everyone who tried to take it has forgotten they ever tried. That is the legacy a woman builds when she decides, quietly and without drama, that she is not finished yet. No developer, no referral commission, no adult children who chose Aspen over a birthday cake. Nobody gets to decide when she is done. If my story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.